It begins with a whisper, a story passed between old women on porches, between drunk men in taverns who swore they would never repeat what they'd heard. A tale that lingers in the shadows of America's forgotten back roads. They say somewhere in the rural heartland, a child was born, but not from husband and wife, nor from a love that could ever be named holy. She was born from brother and sister. Everyone, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit subscribe and tap the bell icon before this story pulls you in too deep, because once you hear it, you may never look at family history the same way again. The town never wrote it down. It was not recorded in church books, nor whispered to the priest in confession. And yet, like an echo that refuses to die, the story remained. A brother and a sister isolated from the world in a farmhouse that leaned against time itself, began what no one dared to imagine. From their secret came a child, a daughter. Her name is gone now, erased by time, but the people who lived near them remembered her face, too pale for the sun, too quiet for a child. She never laughed, they said, never sang, and when she stared at you, her eyes seemed to hold an ancient kind of sorrow, as if she knew what she was before she even understood words. Neighbors claimed they felt the weight of her existence, a reminder that sins could take shape in flesh and blood, and those who saw her swore she carried both the resemblance of her mother and her father, though they were the same blood. Some claimed her smile twisted too unevenly, her features just slightly out of step with nature's rhythm. She was a secret made visible, walking proof of what should have never been allowed. But why was she born at all? Was it loneliness? Was it madness? Or something darker? A tradition carried from ancestors who believed in bloodlines that should never be broken. The answers, buried deep, still haunt the soil she once walked. When we speak of old America, we often imagine the golden stories, the frontier, the pioneers, the land of opportunity. But in the shadows of that same history lies another America, the one people bury in silence. In small, isolated communities where poverty and shame wove tighter bonds than religion ever could, families sometimes turned inward, far too inward. The brother and sister were never named in official records. Some claimed they were children of immigrants. Others whispered they were descendants of early settlers who lost their land and their way. What everyone agreed upon was this: they lived far from town, in a cabin surrounded by fields of brittle corn and crooked trees, the kind that always seemed to bend toward the house like they were listening. When the girl was born, the midwife who helped deliver her refused to speak of it afterward. She left the cabin pale and shaking, swearing never to return. Rumor says she crossed herself 3 times before stepping off that property, and for the rest of her life, whenever someone asked her about that birth, her lips would tremble, and she would mutter the same words: some things should not be born. The child grew in silence. She was kept from church, never allowed in school, and neighbors said the brother and sister locked her away whenever anyone came near. Yet the girl had ways of being seen. People spotted her wandering in the fields at dusk, her thin figure framed by dying light. They said her eyes followed them, unblinking, too knowing for a child's gaze. One woman claimed she heard the girl humming a lullaby she couldn't possibly have known, an old song from Europe, one sung by her own grandmother. As she grew older, whispers only deepened. Those who caught sight of her swore she seemed both too young and too old. Her face carried the innocence of a child, but also the deep lines of something weary, something burdened with knowledge she was never meant to have. And soon, the question that haunted the community was no longer just about her birth. It was about what she might become. Would she carry on their secret? Would she create another generation from a union that should never exist? Or would she be the last echo of their forbidden sin? By the time she reached her teenage years, the whispers had grown into stories people told in hushed tones at the edge of churchyards and over candlelit tables. She was rarely seen, but when she was, it was never forgotten. The girl's presence carried a weight, as if silence itself followed her. Neighbors claimed her footsteps never matched her frame, too heavy for someone so slight. Others said animals reacted strangely around her. Dogs would not bark. Instead, they whimpered and pulled back. Horses refused to pass the path near her cabin, and when hunters brought their kills past the woods, crows circled above in thick black clouds, crying out like omens. The town had long suspected the truth about her parents, the brother and sister who lived as husband and wife in the secrecy of that cabin. Most looked the other way, convincing themselves it was just rumor. But the girl herself made denial impossible. Her face was uneven, her expression unsettling, caught between childlike softness and unnatural maturity. Some nights she wandered into town barefoot, her dress torn, her hair tangled. She would stand still in the center of the dirt road until someone noticed, and then she would vanish back into the dark. One farmer's wife claimed that during one of these appearances, she saw the girl whispering to a baby doll she carried. But when she looked closer, the doll was no doll at all. It was made of cloth scraps sewn together, its head lopsided, its eyes two buttons that didn't match. The girl cradled it with devotion, rocking it as though it were alive. The townspeople began to fear that she was more than a victim of her parents' sin. They believed she was a curse brought to life, a punishment walking among them. They avoided her path, but they could not avoid the stories she created. Mothers told their children never to look her in the eyes, never to answer if she called their name. Men who drank too much swore they heard her voice at night, a soft humming from the woods, weaving into their dreams. And the brother and sister, the ones who made her, grew older but no less strange. They treated her not as a child, but as something to be hidden, something both loved and feared. Witnesses described them watching her from the porch, silent and stiff, as though they were keeping a secret even from themselves. The town began to ask the question no one wanted to say aloud. Was she destined to continue their bloodline, or would she bring its dark legacy to an end? By the time the girl approached her teenage years, she was no longer just the quiet child hidden away on the outskirts of town. She had become a story, a rumor, a dark presence people whispered about, never daring to confront it directly. Farmers crossing the dirt road near her family's home would glance toward the sagging porch and murmur prayers under their breath. Children dared each other to get close to the property, but none stayed long. They said the air around her felt heavier, as though the land itself recoiled from her existence. When she appeared in public, she drew uneasy stares that were difficult to look away from. Her features, though recognizable, seemed to resist harmony. Her eyes never seemed to move together. One lingered, while the other darted. Her smile appeared more like a grimace, lips pulled too tightly, stretching across a face that looked years older than her age. Some townsfolk swore her reflection in shop windows didn't match her movements. Others claimed her shadow bent unnaturally, like it belonged to someone else entirely. Yet, despite their fear, no one intervened. The girl's parents, brother and sister, kept her sheltered, but always present enough that the community could not forget. She was a reminder of what no one dared name. Blood mixed in ways it should never have been. In the quiet corners of town, families discussed her future in hushed tones. What would become of a child born this way, when her very existence seemed like a curse passed down from those who had defied the natural order? The local preacher described her life as a warning from God, a living punishment for sins committed in secret. But behind closed doors, there was something more disturbing whispered, that she was not simply the product of brother and sister, but something worse, a vessel carrying the weight of generations of unspoken transgressions. It was around his age, 16 or so, that the first incidents began. Livestock found dead without explanation. Strange markings carved into the wooden fences near the family property. A baby's crib in a home half a mile away discovered with scratches across the wood, as though small hands had dragged across it in the night. No one could prove her involvement, but everyone believed she was at the center. She was no longer just a child of shame. She had become a living omen, an echo of a truth the town wanted to bury, but could not escape. By the time the girl entered adulthood, her presence weighed on the town like a curse that refused to lift. She was no longer a secret confined to one household. She had become folklore. Whispers of her lineage spread beyond the county lines, reaching neighboring towns where her name was never spoken, only hinted at with grim nods and lowered voices. The most disturbing part wasn't simply her origins, but the way her life began to unfold. She moved with a strange confidence, as if she carried knowledge no one else possessed. Locals claimed she spoke in ways that unsettled them, her voice sometimes too soft, sometimes too sharp, with tones that felt borrowed from more than one person. A shopkeeper once said that when she asked for flour, he heard two voices overlap, one young, one much older, layered in perfect discord. Men who came too close to her described being unsettled, as though her gaze peeled back their thoughts. A traveling salesman confessed that her eyes followed him out of the room, even when he turned away. Others claimed she seemed to know things she shouldn't. Private arguments, financial struggles, even the contents of locked letters. Her reputation shifted from shameful to something darker. People no longer pitied her. They feared her. And yet, as with all secrets in small towns, there were those who could not resist being drawn in. One man in particular, older and unmarried, began visiting the family's property. It was never clear why. Some said he was curious. Others said he was lonely. But there were darker whispers, that he was tempted by the forbidden, as though her cursed bloodline pulled at the weakest in people. Not long after his visits began, the girl was seen less often in town. She no longer walked the dirt road alone or stood by the market stalls. Instead, her absence became another haunting silence. Then came the news no one dared reap at openly. She was with child. To most, it confirmed their deepest fears, that the sin that birthed her would not die with her, but multiply. The idea that another generation would be born from this twisted lineage rattled even the strongest faith in town. They had spent years pretending her existence was survivable, but the thought of what came next made survival feel impossible. The community had not only witnessed the birth of a child from brother and sister. Now, they were watching the roots of something much darker spread, an inheritance of shame, secrecy, and horror. The child born to her was not welcomed as new life usually is. There were no church bells ringing, no casseroles delivered to the family home, no neighbors lining up to offer congratulations. Instead, the town shuddered. They had witnessed one unnatural birth years before, the girl herself, and now history had repeated in a way that felt inescapable. The baby was not simply another child. To the community, it was a symbol of corruption passed down like an unholy inheritance. Accounts of the baby's appearance vary, but the descriptions share one thing in common. Nothing about the child seemed quite right. Some said its eyes were too far apart, gazing in different directions, as though unable to fix on the same world. Others whispered that its skin bore the wrinkles of someone much older, a face aged before its time. There were even murmurs that when the infant cried, the sound carried an unnatural echo, a voice too hollow for a body so small. The family tried to keep the child hidden, raising it quietly within the walls of their home. But in towns like this, silence often makes noise. Locals began to report strange occurrences when they passed by the property, lamps flickering, animals refusing to cross the yard, an overwhelming sense of dread that forced them to hurry their steps. More than one person swore they saw the girl at the window with the child in her arms, both faces staring out at once, both expressions eerily blank. The town elders began to speak of cleansing, of finding some way to break the line. They debated whether it was moral or necessary to intervene, but the truth was simpler and more frightening. They were afraid. No one wanted to be the one to confront what lived inside that house. It was easier to whisper about curses and sins than to knock on the door and face them directly. Meanwhile, the girl, now a mother herself, was no longer seen in public. The boy who had once visited her was gone, vanished without explanation, and his name was quickly erased from memory. The family remained enclosed, as though the walls themselves had swallowed them. To outsiders, it seemed the house was not a home, but a tomb, where a bloodline was being buried alive, even as it multiplied. And so, what began as a single forbidden union now threatened to become an entire lineage, shadowed in secrecy and fear. It was no longer just a story of one birth. It was the planting of something that could not easily be uprooted. By the time decades had passed, the family name had nearly disappeared from public record. The house that once stood as their home was left to rot, its windows shattered, its roof collapsing under the weight of storms. Yet, locals swear that no matter how far the building decayed, one room never fell. The upstairs bedroom where the girl had lived, where she had given birth, where the line of blood had continued. It was as if the house itself was unwilling to release its darkest secret. Those who wandered too close described hearing muffled sounds inside long after the home was abandoned. Soft lullabies sung in voices too warped to belong to the living, or the distant cry of a child when no child was there. Travelers reported feeling watched, and some claimed they saw flickers of light in the bedroom window, as though a candle burned endlessly for the lost family within. The house became a local legend, but not one anyone dared to approach directly. Parents told children to stay away, warning them that stepping too close meant the curse could follow them home. What became of the girl and her child remains uncertain. Some claimed they both died in that house, their bodies quietly buried by the family in an unmarked grave. Others believed they were taken away to an asylum where they faded into obscurity, their identities erased. But there are darker theories, ones whispered only at night, that say the bloodline never ended, that descendants of that forbidden union still walk among us today. They may sit across from you on a bus, stand behind you in a grocery line, or smile at you with features that seem just slightly uneven. Historians and genealogists often skip over the family's records, dismissing them as incomplete or unreliable. But the silence tells its own story. Something was hidden, not just by the family, but by the entire community. The town buried their sham, but shame has a way of growing roots. And if the whispers are true, if the line did survive, then somewhere in America, the secret still lives, walking, breathing, carrying the scar of its origin. Some stories end with closure. This one doesn't. It lingers, unfinished, unresolved, like the echo of a cry you can't unhear. And maybe that's the most terrifying part, because the past is never really past. Sometimes it's still alive, staring back at you from the crowd. Every story leaves a scar. Drop yours in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Something is always listening.